On this episode of Booked on Rock, a deep dive into Mike Campbell's new memoir, Heartbreaker, his lifelong friendship and musical partnership with Tom Petty, the stories behind Petty classics, Refugee, Breakdown, American Girl, You Got Lucky, Free Fallin', and many more coming up next. Welcome back to Booked on Rock. I'm Eric Senich. Legendary Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers guitarist Mike Campbell has a brand new book out now called Heartbreaker, a memoir. Mike Campbell with Ari Serdeval. Here to talk about the book is my good friend Kevin Brown, host of the Tom Petty Project. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. You contacted me asking me if I wanted to talk about this book, and of course I want to talk about this book.
Hell yes.
Yeah, I mean, I picked it up at my local indie store, and it was one of those that I thought, well, I'll give myself a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ahead time, just to sit with it and digest it, and finished it in 4 days. Because of course, like once you pick it up, you can't put the damn thing down. So
it's a great read. He says in the introduction, nobody would ever have imagined it would be me of all people to tell the stories of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Being the host of a Tom Petty podcast and keeping up with what's going on, did you know he was writing a book? Was it a surprise to you? What was your reaction?
I think we first heard about this I obviously the same time as everyone else, but it was only about 4 or 5 months ago. And he's right that you wouldn't expect Mike Campbell, because Mike Campbell doesn't really put himself out front and center. He's always the guy, always the side guy, always happy, supporting the career of someone else. So to get this story from his perspective, I think was a little bit of a surprise for a lot of us. But yeah, it was sort of brewing in the background. But when he sort of did the big announcement, everyone was like, whoa, what? We're finally getting a biog from one of the actual band. This is amazing.
Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to read some excerpts from the book. So I want to start in the beginning, in the introduction. Right away, I love the book because it gives us an insight into Tom Petty that's fascinating.
I think straight away, through the introduction and then the entire book, really, you do get the sense that this is a memoir. It's not an autobiography front to back. It's not just Mike's story. It's Mike's story as a musician. And of course, the most significant part of that story is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and Tom Petty specifically, and Benmont Tench, and, Randall, all the guys who were in Mudcrutch, all the guys in the Heartbreakers, and then everyone else he's worked with. But there really is a focus on his relationship with Tom and his relationship with Tom's music, which I think is a really smart editorial choice, just on the writing side, to really give you that very solid framework that people know enough of that story, but you can sort of tack all these little anecdotes and these remembrances onto that and give it some structure and give it some form. I think it was a really smart idea to do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sharing the screen. You're able to see what I'm seeing here, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. The Heartbreakers started in Los Angeles in 1976, but we all came from Gainesville, Florida. I was the guitar player. Stan was the drummer. He was wild and funny. And there was Ron, a sweet and sensitive guy, and an incredible bass player. Rock and roll is not always the best line of work if you're sweet and sensitive. So for many years, we had another bass player named Howie. It was a hard job for him too, but in different ways. Benmont was there from the start. He was from Gainesville too, but he was a little different from us. He was younger, came from a good, loving home, and he was a genius. He could turn 2 chords into Booker T playing Beethoven symphonies. I would say he became one of the greatest rock and roll keyboard players of all time, but he was about as good as he is now when he was 17. Tom used to say that about me, that I was a good guitar player when he first heard me, as I was when we got famous. The first time Tom ever heard me play was in 1970 in a shack outside Gainesville that I lived in when I had nowhere else to go, and I didn't know what to do with my life. I can't say the same for Tom. He was pretty good when we met. He had been playing in bands for a couple of years already, and then he got better and better and better. But even early on, when I couldn't fathom, not in my wildest dreams, how far he would take us, he never doubted it for a second. He once told his dad that if he would just get off his back, he would be a millionaire by the time he was 35. And he was right. Tom was a songwriter too, like me, but also not like me. I could give him a tape of 3 chords that I recorded to play over while I practiced, and he would come back with lyrics thousands of people would sing with tears in their eyes. He wrote songs that gave people great courage and comfort. And sometimes he would give me a few verses over 2 chords, and I would write a guitar part that made it a hit, that made people roll down the windows and drive faster when it came on the radio. Sometimes I would write a guitar line like that and try to throw it away, but he'd save it. Time after time, he heard things in me that I couldn't hear in myself. Tom never doubted that we would make it. When all I knew was that I had nowhere to go, Tom knew we were going to the top. Nothing was going to stop him. He was little and he was skinny, but he could be unbreakable. He could withstand pressure like nobody I have ever seen. Tom Petty was one of the toughest people I have ever met, but it could make him hard on people. And then he would feel bad and get down on himself. He worried a lot. Sometimes he made me so angry I couldn't look at him. But nothing could ever split us up. We were brothers from the same muse. Early on, before we even knew it, we made some unspoken deal that we were going down the line together, no matter what. Me and him, full speed ahead, from the very beginning to the very end. The first place Tom and I ever played together was a topless bar on Route 441 outside Gainesville. We played Creedence covers to a bunch of drunk rednecks who threw empty Schlitz cans at us if we blocked their view of the dancers. The last place we played together was the Hollywood Bowl. The last song we played together was American Girl. The last song on the first album we ever made together. It was the end of the show, the end of the tour, the end of the road. And at the end of that song, there's one of those guitar parts I was telling you about, this little guitar riff I played over the outro. When we recorded it, I played it just as a placeholder until I thought of something better. Tom wouldn't let me change it. He said, "Are you crazy?" For the next 40 years, whenever I played that little guitar riff at the end, people cheered. They cheered for me, the poor kid from across the tracks, the quiet kid in the back, whose dreams somehow all came true. They cheered for the luckiest guy in the world. The crowd rose to their feet that night when I played it at the Hollywood Bowl. As the song crashed to a close and the last notes we would ever play together rang in the air, I glanced over at Tom. He was beaming. His eyes were full of joy, and he shot me that look he had, that smirk. If you know him, you know the look I'm talking about. He gave me that look as if to say, "I told you." As the band left the stage, Tom was down front waving to the crowd, signing some autographs. Backstage, I sat down and caught my breath, but I wanted to catch him before he left. I wanted to say goodbye. I wanted to tell him how much I loved him and how proud I am of what we created together and how grateful I am for everything we went through, even the hard times. But I missed him somehow. I turned around and he was gone. I'll tell you instead.
It's a hell of an intro, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that obviously there's an author involved. Iris Udaval, like you said, is the ghost writer for this, and I don't know if Mike Campbell alone would have been able to put the story together in this way, but it's so artfully constructed that you get that almost that end to end right off the top, right, and in just very, very bullet point form, but he gives you the shape of what's to come. So even if you're only a casual Heartbreakers fan, you know what's coming. And of course, that last little section where he's talking about the 40th and the show in September at the Hollywood Bowl. I mean, that was hard to read, because you think, okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to deal with that. At the end of this book, clearly Mike's going to talk about this, and so I'm gonna have to deal with processing my emotions again at losing Tom, because obviously, with any story like this, and we get into so much detail about the relationship as well as the music, you kind of get invested in the characters, even if it's fiction, right? When it's fact or fiction, you get invested in the characters. So knowing that dark cloud's on the horizon and it's heading towards you when you get into those later chapters, it's heavy, man. I found that really heavy.
Very heavy.
The last half of this book,
Very heavy. And it turns out that he had a broken hip. He was walking around with a broken hip, standing on stage for 2+ hours with a broken hip. The pain that must have given Tom. Yet he would not take, I guess, what he would have needed is a year off, surgery and a year off. He would still be here today.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those woulda, shoulda, coulda. I mean, you never know. I mean, he could have been hit by a buzz. There's all those things grow through your mind. And I know that there's a sort of a weird subset of the fandom that kind of hold it against him in a way, where they think that he did the wrong thing by doing that. But of course, you're just not to know, right?
But he felt he was doing the wrong thing by
canceling, and yeah, exactly.
Right? He was thinking about the fans. He was thinking about the people that work on the road. That's their job. So that's what he was thinking.
And that's another thing that I think Mike ends up talking about that in the book as well, about he felt a real obligation to that crew because, and as you know, you've spoken to so many writers and about so many bands that when you get to that stage where you're 40-year career or you're this huge stadium or arena act, that's a business now as well. You've got a lot of people whose entire livelihood depends on you touring. And Tom always felt that responsibility to make sure that everyone was looked after and everyone had work. And what it really impressed me was the fact that he said that everyone They knew that once everyone finished, whenever the ride finished, that everyone had pensions, everyone was looked after. They knew that all the crew, all the road people, all the business managers, they were all looked after financially, right? So Tom made sure that all those people in his employ were looked after. And of course, that care that he gave to us fans, I would argue, is he did the same thing with the fact that the quality of the music all through his career. Mike doesn't talk about the last three albums in too much detail, but the quality of the albums, the quality of the product that he gave to us never flagged either. So
Sure.
it sort of shows that focus on being a good musician, being a good professional, being a good person permeated throughout the Heartbreakers. So it didn't just come from Tom; it came from Mike as well.
Yeah, and for those who may not know the inner workings of the Heartbreakers, Mike was mentioning first names only, so we should run through them. He mentioned Benmont Tench, and Benmont
The third
he was the founding member of the band.
Yes. So the story there is that, Tom had gone to LA to try and get signed with his band Mudcrutch, and which Benmont wasn't a part of at that time. So when they got to LA and they're working with Denny Cordell, they just couldn't get, they were cutting it with, different songs. They couldn't quite get something that would work. They weren't really happy with it. And eventually Denny Cordell said, well, okay, really, you're the star. So we're going to go with Tom Petty as a solo act, and we're going to bring in Duck Dunn and all the, Jim Keltner, and we'll bring in different people to play the backing parts for your songs, but it's kind of you. But Tom never wanted that, right? Tom Petty wanted to be in a band, and he knew he needed Mike Campbell because him and Mike have been playing together for years in Mudcrutch. So he sort of surreptitiously kept bringing them all back. And then one night he'd gone over to visit Benmont because Benmont had moved, and then when Mudcrutch got dropped, Benmont Tench stuck around in LA and tried to form his own band, tried to get something going. And so when he went over there, Tom was playing with Stan Lynch, he was playing with Ron Blair, and Tom said, yeah, I'll have these three. And that's how they sort of ended up becoming, with Mike Campbell, became the Heartbreakers. They go back to Denny Cordell, play a couple of songs, and Cordell thankfully recognized, this works now. Whatever wasn't working with Mudcrutch, it is working now with these guys.
And Benmont keyboards, Ron Blair bass, Stan Lynch drums, Howie Epstein replaced Ron Blair, and then Ron Blair came back on bass.
Yeah.
Okay.
So after Hard Promises, for the Long After Dark album, that's when Howie comes in. So Tom is working with Del Shannon, producing his record, and says, I think I got to take Howie. And Del's pleading with him, saying, please don't take Howie. Apart from anyone else, just don't take Howie. But Tom says, sorry, I got to have him. And so then Howie joins the band. Sadly, Howie passed away in 2002 from heroin overdose, and then Ron. So that's a good bit in the book too. I didn't know about sort of one of the things that Mike reveals is that it was Mike actually who said to Tom, well, our bass player is Ron Blair. Just get Ron back.
Yes.
Because Ron was always kind of kicking in. Mike had been jamming with Ron on and off through, all through down the years, and they'd done the blue, I hadn't done the Blue Stingrays at that point. That might be as after, but they were jamming. He said, "Yeah, just bring Ron back because Ron knows all our stuff and he's the right guy, and we know him." And so Ron Blair comes back in. So that's unusual too, hey? Where one guy leaves and comes back after a long time.
Yeah, that was interesting, and the story of Howie is just sad, tragic, very sad. A sweet guy, drugs took him down. And there's one word that really stands out, and he mentions it in the introduction. Grateful. Mike Campbell was grateful for what he had, but Howie seemed to resent or focus on the resentment of maybe what, in his mind, maybe he could have gotten more. Maybe he could have gotten paid more. I don't know. Or he was talking, he was saying something to Mike Campbell about being replaced on bass with a few tracks here or there in the studio, and how that just pissed him off 30 years later. And Mike Campbell was like, what are you talking about? Mike just seemed to be level-headed and, again, grateful for what he had. And if there's ever a secret to a long, successful career, be grateful for what you have, because you could very easily obsess over what you don't have.
Yeah, it's that thing in modern society where success is measured by sort of how prominent you are. And I always think, if you look at sort of the big sports players, if you're looking at LeBron James or you're looking at, your Sidney Crosby's and everything, everyone focuses on them as individuals, where really I always think of all my favorites musicians, all my favorites athletes, they're all good team players. And that's, I think Mike that's part of his DNA. Mike would rather be part of a great team than be headlining, but not necessarily, the main guy. But I think also part of that is that Mike is a pure musician. And I always got that sense that Tom surrounded himself and managed to surround himself with those guys who, the thing they cared about more than anything else was always writing the best song they could write every single time. And that comes through in this book, right, where Mike continually says that, he's going off working with someone else, or he's giving this song to Don Henley and he's working with Don Henley and he's got all these opportunities. But really what he wants to do is write with Tom, because musically that symbiosis, that thing that they have between each other, it's rare, right? I mean, you can't replace that. It's the same thing, we're both big Van Halen fans. That thing that Eddie and Alex had, even though they were brothers, they were also musical brothers. And
Sure.
you take one of those elements out and it just doesn't work. You need that interplay between two people, and between Mike and Tom, it was just perfect.
Yeah, remember Mike talking about Tom Petty was getting overwhelmed because Mike kept sending tapes to Tom, like almost to upstage him, like, oh, you think you could write? What about this? And Tom Petty's like, whoa, slow down, man. Hold on a sec. Yeah. Talk about Mike's childhood. He didn't come from privilege and money. He moved to Jacksonville after his parents got divorced, and he lived in a low-income neighborhood. Not at all surprising to hear he liked the Beatles. They inspired him to want to play guitar. Loved the Beach Boys as much as the Beatles. So your thoughts on the early part of the book and his childhood? Any surprises, anything interesting that stands out?
I mean, I didn't know about his dad, sort of being in the army and going away and that whole situation. So I think that, when I come from what they used to call a broken home. My mum and dad divorced when I was young. So living with my dad and then living with my mum, that sort of tension of only having one parent and sort of feeling like you're kind of a bit of an outsider just because of that definitely creates a bit of an FU attitude. It can do. And I think that hardness, that little bit of hardness where you have to be self-reliant and you have to sort of look out for other people early in your life. I think that maybe sort of, if you've got that, that sense of, fairness and rightness in life and work ethic, I think that can bolster that. So I think that, Mike's one of those kids who was lucky that it didn't break him and push him down the bad path, which a lot of kids end up going down. And it was sort of reinforced, well, okay, well, I got to work hard and I got to make my own way through life. So I think that grounding is where some of that, I think that's where some of that work ethic comes from, probably.
We get stories of what Tom Petty's childhood was like. His mom and grandmother seemed to be like sweet people, but his dad, Earl, he scared the shit out of Tom. Although, and I want to have you listen to, and I was going to send you the link earlier this week before we recorded. There's a great interview Mike Campbell did with Brian Hyde of Rolling Stone, and it's Rolling Stone Now, and it runs on SiriusXM, but they also have the podcast version of it. He did say, he goes, Earl, he said, Earl wasn't all that bad. He goes, I got along with him. He was just a character, but still, I think Tom was a little intimidated by his dad. I mean, there are stories about he's punching Tom so hard he knocked him off his chair, went after him with his belt. I mean, that's rough to read. I believe Tom was pretty open about that, but was that in his later years? Did he reveal that relationship in his book and in interviews?
Yeah, I mean, you get some of that in the Warren Zanes biography. Doesn't really get into it as much with Paul Zolo, but in the Zanes biography, some of that is in there. And when I was reading that too, I was thinking about that as well, because when you hear he wasn't that bad of a guy, and of course, socially, if you're not his kid, you can be wonderful with you. We all know those guys who, you drink with or whatever. And when you find out they've been beating their wife, you think, really? Oh, it just seemed like a pretty cool dude, like that's off, man. That's really crazy. So I think there's a part of it might be that where if you're not sort of really experiencing that and not exposed to it, and you're only seeing the other side of it, where it's just this kind of happy-go-lucky drunk, which is what Earl was, right? Like he was a drunk. He was just not a great guy. But to be hitting your kids, to be punching your kids, I just think straight away it's sort of irredeemable. I don't know how you. Well,
and Mike Campbell did say that in the interview. He goes, "That's unforgivable." There's no question he said that. Yeah. Well, he shows up one night with some girls, right? Like 2 or 3 girls. He's drunk, comes back from the bar, and Tom and Mike are hanging, playing tunes together, just jamming a little bit. And his father had a few. He starts bullying Tom and Mike, and Tom told him he told his dad, "Yeah, you should probably get going, Dad." No. And here's where this is the story. I'm so curious if you knew about this one. This is where Earl's like, "Don't do me like that, boy." And as I'm reading that, I'm like, don't do me like that. I wonder if that's a connection. And sure enough, that was it. Like Tom remembered that. Don't do me like that. Don't do me like that, son. That's what he would say to him. Yeah.
Well, all the great songwriters do that, right? They crib all those things where those little lines or those little phrases or things you see on graffiti. It's just like it all goes in and then it all eventually comes out of it's good, right? Yeah. And I definitely knew that one. I'm not too sure if that was that might be through Paul Zolo's book. I think he maybe talks about it there. I'd have to go back and read that. But yeah, I mean,
And that's when Mike realizes he's a good songwriter. This kid can write.
yeah. Well, even prior to that, when he was Epics and the Sundowners, and everyone, Petty had a reputation around Gainesville. People knew who he was, right? He's this kind of lank, scruffy, weighs about 20 pounds in a wet parka kind of kid, but
Yeah.
kid can play. Kid can play and kid can write.
Those early Mudcrutch gigs, they landed a 6-week gig at a bar and grill, and they wanted out the first night because they realized this place, this is a shithole. They had a gun pulled on them. That's page 110. I think I'll look for the excerpt if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, because you get in all those shows at Dubs and all those shows at these dive bars, and they said they get sent down to Tampa or something, whichever city it was, and they're like I said the same thing. They get there and they're like, oh my god, this is not good. And then you're having to play covers as well because you've got to give the people what they want so they'll keep drinking. No one wants to hear originals. If you're some scruffy band from Gainesville, you better be playing, whatever's on the radio at the moment. And that gets a bit wearing, right? Especially if you're writing your own songs.
Chapter 14. We pulled up to the place late in the afternoon. It looked like a rusted tin shack on the edge of the water with a corrugated tin roof and a door barely hanging on to its hinges. We walked in together, blinking in the darkness from the brightness of the sun. The smell hit us first. It was like a low tide of piss and spilled beer had receded and left the ruins of this place in its wake. The owner was behind the bar. He didn't say hello. He didn't smile. He said, set up over there. The place was empty except for the bar, where 3 of the oldest, grimiest fishermen I had ever seen sat encrusted on their bar stools like barnacles. They perched toothless and scowling over small mugs of flat, warm, 10-cent draft beer. We set up the gear and went outside. There was nothing around. We walked along the water for a little bit, not talking. Then we waited in Keith's van until it was time to play. Who was Keith? Was that their roadie?
It was one of their friends who had a van and would just kind of tote them around. Yeah.
All right. When we walked back in, the place was still empty except for the fishermen who had not moved. They had been joined on the last stool at the bar by a very small, very heavyset, very drunk woman. She could barely stand, but when she managed, she couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. When we walked in, she was yelling, buy me another, one of you bums, buy me another. One of the fishermen nodded at the owner, who poured well bourbon into the double rocks glass she clutched with her thick, small fingers. All right, let's see. They played Little Wing, and when they started playing, a few songs in, we started Little Wing. One of the fishermen approached the woman and held out his hand. She took it and slid off the stool, led her to the floor, and they slow danced awkwardly out of time to the band. We went back the next day around noon to get our gear and get out of there. Now, this is their gear, keep in mind. It was dark and empty when we walked in. Nobody was behind the bar. I went up on the stage and started unplugging our PA while Randall broke down his drum kit and Tom and the other guitarist carried the amps down. I wasn't looking when the owner called out, asking what the hell we thought we were doing. Tom went down to talk to him. He said it didn't look like it was going to work out. We had to cut our engagement short. Tom turned and walked back to the stage, and the owner pulled a pistol from the small of his back and held it on us. He was drunk. He took the safety off. His finger was on the trigger. He told us to put those goddamn amplifiers back. We weren't going any goddamn where. We booked 6 weeks, and we were playing 6 weeks. And if we took one more step with our gear, he'd kill us where we stood. He told us he didn't care. Kill every last one of us. Feed us to the gators. Don't believe him? Try him. Just try him.
I love that because it goes on to talking about because they end up going to the police about this.
Yes,
and the police are just kind of like, oh god, he's doing it again. So it's like this guy's clearly got form with this, but it's crazy, right? When you think about that and think about these bands and the young men going around, you shouldn't be taking your life in your hands trying to get a gig, But I'm sure that so many of those bands worked so many of those shitty gigs for so many years.
Those are the how serious do you want to be a musician stories.
Exactly, but it's also where you learn your chops, right? And that's where I think that's where your idols these days and those kinds of things. I know it's sort of low hanging fruit, but if you haven't done the 500 crappy gigs, you haven't played for 1,500, 1,800 crappy hours in front of people learning stagecraft, learning a set of songs, learning how to play your instrument, learning how to do all those kinds of things that when you do get your chance, I think that's those bands that do make it. Part of it is because they've had all that experience of working it up. and getting the songs, shining them up and making sure they're all good and make sure everyone's tight. Man, you can tell a tight band, right? When you see a tight band, it can be in a crappy little pub. And we've probably seen bands like Petty and Mudcrutch were when they were just starting out, where you think, man, these guys are good. They're a tight band. Well, they've probably played 600-700 gigs, you know?
Elliot Roberts, this guy, he became the band's co-manager in 1979. How much did you know about him before reading the book?
Only a little bit. And I know that he was one of those guys who really was sort of hyper business focused. My sense of it was that he just didn't really care all that much about the music. Right. He was only concerned about the business side of it, and so talked exclusively in sort of business speak. And there's that great anecdote about him talking to Stan, right, and saying, Stan, there's rich, there's famous, and there's hot. Right now you're hot. And sort of saying, tell him that you got to keep working, and you'll only get rich and famous if you keep down this path. So I mean, in one regard, he was definitely sort of an influence on saying stick the course and keeping everyone's sort of expectations in check. But on the other hand, you could be, always think that when those guys, you could be a little bit more sympathetic, you know? You could be have a little bit more empathy as a human being. Maybe.
Which he did not seem to have, when he first met with Stan and Mike, I think it was just Stan and Mike meeting with Elliot. I think in this scene that we're going to get to here.
Right.
He says, well, fellas, it looks like God has to come down and pull this big fat dick out of Tom's ass. It was quite an opener, is what Mike writes. There's going to be a few changes. And we all exchanged looks. Stan spoke first, of course. Stan said, gee, it sounds like we missed the meeting. And Elliot regarded Stan with curiosity. How do you mean, Stan? Sounds like the real meeting already happened, didn't it? Elliot smiled at Stan, sincerely impressed with how quickly he got it. Stan, you're absolutely right. This isn't a band meeting. This is you telling us how it's going to be. Correct. This is fucking bullshit. Ron agreed, so Ron was there too.
Yep.
Stan, Ron, you guys have a condition. I have seen it before. It's called Sideman Syndrome. What is that supposed to mean? You think you're as important as Tom. You are not. Elliot explained Tom was the star. Tom was the front man. Tom was the songwriter. Tom did all the interviews. Tom worked with Tony every day. Who's Tony again?
Tony Dimitriadis. He was their manager. Yeah.
Yes. And you want the same amount of money as him for playing bass, for playing the drums? Elliot said he didn't think so.
Yeah.
Guys, he explained it wasn't reality. He wanted to disavow us of these fanciful notions because they would destroy the band. Resentments would fester, and they did with some of them. You know, with Stan.
Yeah, Stan never got over that.
Yeah.
You know, that's clear. That was kind of the first wedge that got driven in the relationship between Stan and Tom. And obviously they went out and toured successfully and everything else. But I don't think Stan ever really fully forgave Tom for that. And what I suspect, though, the thing that, you know, from everything I've read and heard from Stan, it wasn't necessarily so much that the decision was made. It's the fact that Tom didn't tell them. You know what I mean? Because you would expect that these guys you've come up with and these guys you've done the hundreds of gigs with and that you've played with all of these years and that you've roomed with and you've rolled with and all that kind of stuff, it really probably is your job to go and say, hey, look, on the business side, we've got to change the relationship here because I'm doing 90% of the heavy lifting and you're essential as part of the band. I got to be paid more for doing more of the work, which is... It is fair, right? I mean, that is if you're doing all the interviews and you're writing especially if you're writing all the songs. I mean, come on, it is Tom Petty's band, you know. Sure,
I can understand why Tom didn't want to do it. It was probably really hard for him to do, but it made it worse 100%. To have somebody else do it for him.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, then it's just, you know, I don't know. That wasn't cool, but it's a tough spot for Tom to be in. That's one thing about Tom Petty, though. You could see why he survived as long as he did, because we know with his battles with the record labels, he was tough, like business tough.
Yeah. As soon as MCA screwed him over the first time, that was never happening again, right? And then you get that whole issue with Damn the Torpedoes and hiding the tapes so that the lawyers can't get him. And then you have the situation with Hard Promises and the 898 and all that kind of stuff, you know, not wanting to overcharge for albums so that kids could actually still buy them. And what I like, though, about the book is that Mike backs him on that, right? Where he says, you know, we had our doubts about it and we weren't happy about it, but he sort of recognized in the end that, yeah, it was fair. It was just maybe not handled in the optimal way.
Kevin Brown is the host of the Tom Petty Project podcast, and we're talking about Mike Campbell's memoir, which was released in March, called Heartbreaker. I love getting the stories behind the songs and the albums, and I will have to. I'm preaching to the choir here because that's what your podcast is about, breaking down the songs, right?
Yeah.
So let's get to those. From the first album, we have Breakdown.
What's fantastic is having, because obviously we've got a lot of this information. That's one thing I was going to say generally about the book is, as you know, the hardcore fans, we know a lot of these stories already, but we don't know them from this angle, right? So either we've just heard Tom talking to Paul Zolo in conversations with Tom Petty, or we sort of heard, in interviews and those types of things, but getting Mike's angle on it and his perspective, whether it either confirms what we already know or challenges it slightly or sheds a little bit more light on it, is fantastic. Of course, Breakdown was a 9-minute jam basically, and the little lick that diddle-doo, diddle-doo, that little lick that he plays was tagged onto the outro, like it wasn't even. And then I think it was Jeff or Marty Girard came in and was saying like, dude, that little lick at the end, that's the hook for the song. Yeah. So they get everyone out of bed and they all come back in the studio and then they build the song around that little lick, which is super cool.
And the Bob Marley influence. Here's the segment from the book. The third song we recorded with the 3-guitar lineup was a sparse, moody 2-chord vamp with a bare sketch of lyrics. Tom had written it on piano the night before, and I could tell what had inspired it. Seeing Bob Marley. It wasn't reggae, but it had a similar slinky groove. Tom sang it with breath and space in his phrasing as he ad-libbed over it. It was called Breakdown. We jammed on it. Stan, Ron, Benmont, Tom, Jeff, and me. But Stan was having trouble finding a beat for it. Suddenly, Jim Keltner appeared. It's all about the groove, Stan. Just find the groove. I'm trying, Jim, I'm trying. Put one arm behind your back. Stan put his arm behind his back and played. He found the beat. He looked over to say thanks. Keltner was gone.
It's funny, right? Because Keltner ghosts in a couple of times in this book where Mike sort of describes him as he's just there.
Was he recording in another room? What was the explanation?
I believe so, yeah. And I should say it was Dwight Twilley actually who had sort of mentioned the lick at the end. I just looked it up to confirm. Okay, I'm terrible with names, but
yeah, that's a good story. American Girl. One of the all-time classics from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
You got to think, too, that, if you're Mike Campbell and you're Ron Blair and Stan Lynch and Ben Montench, when you hear American Girl, you must think, okay, we're getting into a different level now. We're getting into something that's not just, every man rock and roll. It's not everyone can write that song. I would argue Breakdown's kind of in the same vein, but American Girl, you think, not only is that just a hit, you can smell hit all over that song, which it didn't end up being. But also, it's brilliantly crafted. And Stan Lynch was a huge part of why as well. But
when he sang the first line, we thought he might be sending up all the patriotic slop that had been blasting from every radio and television for months, all leading up to today, America's big, booming birthday. Then he sang the next line, and nobody thought he was joking. Tom played us the song and looked up for our reaction. Nobody said anything for a moment. We were a tough crowd. Tom would go on to sing that song for millions of people, and it was probably a breeze compared to singing it for the four of us. It was great, and we all knew it, but it wasn't American Girl yet. We took our instruments drenched in sweat in the stifling room. Stan sat behind the drums as Benmont went to the organ. Ron and I picked up our instruments. How Stan heard in Tom's sparse acoustic folk strumming, Bo Diddley of all things, is beyond me. But that's the beat he found almost instantly. He picked up his sticks and started pounding out Bo Diddley against Tom's triplets. It was perfect. I almost never worked out guitar parts before we recorded. If they didn't appear spontaneously, they felt stiff to me. It was inspiration and improvisation that made anything I had ever played special. I wanted to find a way to keep the song as spare as what Tom had played, but that built the tension to the beat. We didn't have a 12-string, so I tried to fake it on the broadcaster. I held down the high E string at the 10th fret, the G string on the 7th fret, and I let the open D string drone. I muted the other 3 strings and strummed hard against Stan's beat. Jeff stayed close to Tom's part, trying to find a lane for his playing in the arrangement. I could tell he didn't love it. As we were working out the introduction, Noah walked over to Ron. He said he had an idea. Ron, can you be the mice? I thought I was the elephant. You are the elephant. But what if the elephant was the mice? It's quite a conversation. Ron smiled and said, yeah, I can be the mice. He entered the song with a beautiful 3-note melody high up on his bass, then placed his fingertips gently over the frets and let the harmonics ring out like bells. Benmont fell in. We all backed off to give Tom room to sing. I played power chords, just the root and the 5th on the B and high E strings, and let them sustain. For a whole chord, you need the root, the third note of the scale, and the fifth note of the scale. But when I eliminated the third, everything resonated more clearly. Less was more. As it built toward the chorus, I walked into the chord changes with little bluegrass runs. This is great stuff for musicians. This is like inside baseball. We worked it out quickly, all our parts falling into place. It just happened. There was a little talk about a guitar solo, and I said, no way. Tom said, maybe throw something in at the end. We recorded the song, and at the end, figuring we would just fade it out before we got there, I played this little hammer-on country rock riff. I was almost joking. I thought it sounded like the end of Freebird. Yeah, when we finished and listened back, I shook my head at it. Don't worry, I'll change that. Tom looked at me. Are you crazy? Phil Seymour from the Dwight Tilley Band came in and sang the falsetto Last All Night and the high harmonies. We wanted the long ah at the end to go on forever without pause, so Tom and Phil stood together. Tom sang a long sustained high D until he was completely out of breath. Just before he couldn't hold it any longer, Phil sang the note with full force as Tom drew his breath. When Phil couldn't sustain the note for one more second, Tom came in and sang it again. We called it the laser note. It led into the ringing D and F-sharp pattern I played, the pedal point technique I learned in my music history class in Gainesville, and that led into the burst of guitar flash that I played without thinking that Tom saved, that made people cheer for me for decades. All of that together is what made it American Girl.
Yeah. And he says it was, it was by far our best song at the time and maybe the best that we ever did. And I would definitely argue with it being the best they ever did, but it's got such a, those when bands release their debut record and you've got a song like that on there, there's just something about the rawness of it and about the sort of the immediacy and authenticity of it that really lands, right? And then one of the other things too about that song is they mic'd up Stan Lynch's drums really weird because that whole drum part is just coming through two overhead mics, so the kick isn't mic'd, so it gives it this really weird, crisp, almost kind of flattish thing with it. Got a little bit of reverb in it, but it's such a cool drum sound and it's so unique because they just thought, well, fuck it, we'll just use the overheads, but it gives it that distinctiveness. I mean, it's one of those things that you can't replicate it, right? And it's the same thing with Mike talking about playing just three of the strings and muting and three of the strings. If you play it with the big open chords, as a lot of people do, you're playing it wrong and it doesn't sound quite right. So it gives it that very distinctive jangle that we get.
Try coming up with a song that you would say is Tom Petty's most famous or most iconic. You could go with American Girl. You could go with I Won't Back Down. You can go with Free Fallin'. You can go
Running Down a Dream. You can go
Running Down a Dream.
There are a few candidates, yeah.
There are quite
Refugee,
a few. Refugee. Yeah, it's hard to pick one. All right, let's talk about next song would be I picked out excerpt on a little more on Don't Do Me Like That. Let's see, page 258. Towards the end of the sessions, an engineer said, hey, what about that cool stop-start one you did? I really like that one. They listened to it, and Tom told Jimmy he planned to give it to the J. Gals band. Jimmy hit the ceiling. He demanded it go on the album. We redid it, and it came out as a testament to Shelley Yakis as an engineer. It was masterfully recorded, and once again, Benmont and Stan stole the song with a beautiful interplay between the drums and the organ. Benmont plays the first 4 bars on the piano, and when he switches to organ and Stan settles into the groove, you can practically hear their friendship.
They demoed Don't Do Me Like That with Mudcrutch, and that is kicking around if anyone wants to hear that. You can find it online. And so it's really interesting to see where it lands from where it started, because that whole thing with Benmont, with the organ stuff, that's kind of a new development later, and it is definitely, for me, what gives that song its character.
Jimmy said there was a trick to making a song better when you were working with a keyboard player like Danny Federici of the E Street Band or Benmont Tench. He said it worked every time. Turn him up. Jimmy pushed Benmont way up on the song for the first time, and it was a big part of how full and rich the record sounded.
That was something that I've talked about on the podcast that I hadn't actually read anywhere. So it was really kind of gratifying to hear Mike talking about it, that they turned Benmont up, because when you get to Damn the Torpedoes, the first 2 albums, you don't really hear Benmont that much. He's in a few key parts, and obviously the breakdown's got he's a big sort of presence on that one, but apart from that, you don't really hear him. But he's such a huge part of the Heartbreakers sound.
Yeah.
And he was such a big part of Mudcrutch's sound coming in. So the fact that Jimmy Iovine recognized that, well, you've got this great keyboard player, let's get him pumped up. And he's all throughout Damn the Torpedoes and then on throughout the rest of the Heartbreakers career. And I think that that's one of the reasons that one of the things that set them apart, really, was because they had this great keyboard player in there as well, who could play piano, who could play organ, play anything with keys.
Donald Duck Dunn played bass on...
He played bass on a few tracks with the Heartbreakers. Yeah, which that
That's
was the
him.
weird one to me because Woman in Love to me is the one that you don't need Duck Dunn on because it's not a like it's a pretty straight part because Duck's got this
Sure.
great shuffle and he's on a song called Hometown Blues, which is kind of a shuffle. You know, it's got this shuffle thing, so that's perfect for Duck Dunn. And then he played on the second album as well. I'm pretty sure, or was it? He played on. I'm pretty sure he played on three Heartbreakers tracks. You tell me.
Yeah.
From Down the Torpedoes, and then, like I said, Women in Love. So, what a great guy to have around
But
and to learn from.
that's what Howie was resentful about. That was one of the examples of why didn't they need me? Why didn't they want me for those tracks?
The other thing I liked about that I didn't know about Mike telling us that Duck Dunn actually stuck up for Stan because Jimmy Iovine used to give Stan the gears all the time, telling him he was a shitty drummer and telling him he was a bad person, all this kind of stuff. And they, Stan was out of the band, then back in the band,
That I
and out
want
of
to
the
get
band,
to.
back in the
Yeah.
band. Yeah, but I love that Duck Dunn called him sticks and said lay off him, like you're doing the same thing that they used to do to Bill Wyman in the Stones. There's no need for it. He's a great drummer, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Damn the Torpedoes was the album. That's where the battles with Jimmy
Yeah.
Iovine and Stan. I mean, he rode Stan hard, and then things get really heated with Tom and Stan. This is, I think, when it all starts with Stan, or was Stan always kind of butting heads with Tom?
He was always a bit like he's a strong character, very strong-willed, right? And obviously knows his own mind and likes to get his own way as well, as Tom does. So when you get two personalities like that in close proximity in a band, it's always going to be fireworks. Thankfully, they more or less managed it most of the time. But the whole thing with Down the Torpedo sessions was that Iovine's coming in, right? So he's done, I think, Born to Run he engineered, and he's coming in now. This is his first real job as full producer, and there's big responsibility on him. This record's supposed to be the big record that's going to take the Heartbreakers to the next level. So he comes in and he wants everything done his way, and it's got to be done perfect. So they mic'd up the drums and they tested 50 different snares, and they had Stan sitting there for days on end just hitting his snare drum, just kicking his kick drum, just hitting the cymbals to get exactly the right sound that Jimmy Iovine wanted. Which
But
is
that's
gonna
not Stan, though.
piss anyone off. Exactly.
He's on the
Stan's
spot, like Mike Campbell said.
He's a live player.
He
He's a live player. He's a field player. He's not a machine, right? So yeah,
right. Because Mike says here, on the fly, Stan would come up with idea after idea. The snare roll that kicks in Refugee as powerfully as the one that opens Like a Rolling Stone. The fills that sound like fireworks leading into the choruses of Even the Losers. The rumbling answer to the slash chords of Don't Do Me Like That. The swing he brought to the Walk This Way drums on my demo for Here Comes My Girl. Stan came up with all of it on the spot. Now, here is the part that just blows my mind. So when they're recording Damn the Torpedoes, it was like Stan was the goalie. He got no credit when we won and took all the blame if we lost. Fire the drummer. It's that simple. I didn't know what Jimmy and Tom were looking for. One take didn't work because Shelley heard something off. Nobody could figure out what it was that Shelley heard or didn't hear. We checked every mic placement, every instrument, every amplifier. It turned out that a pile of scrap wood that had been in the far corner of the room had been removed. Shelley could hear the difference. Oh my God. We had to go find scrap wood to replace it. Fire the drummer. It's that simple. We started to turn on one another. If a take didn't work, Stan would point his fingers at Ron and claim Ron was speeding up. We bickered and argued. Benmont got needled and teased. It was like a psychological experiment gone haywire. Everybody yelled at everybody else, while I sat quiet and blamed myself. It was all my fault. If only I was playing better. I close my eyes and take deep breaths and picture myself walking on the beach in Santa Barbara with Marcy, that's his wife, and try it again. Stan started pushing back harder. To Stan, it was all about the band. These specific 5 guys in a room playing together. That was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. That was what we sounded like. And Stan yells, put Deputy Dog behind the boards. We're still going to sound like us. Yeah, here's, let's see. Stan began expressing complete contempt for Jimmy. Stan told him to stay on the other side of the glass where he belonged. Jimmy gave it right back. He told Stan he was 2 things, quote, an asshole and a shitty drummer, and neither are useful to my productions. Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, it's that's the thing where I think that, when you've got these people who are creative, the word genius gets bandied around, but if you've got creative genius or really high level creatives in a room together and they've all got a very specific thing in their brain, a specific way something should be, you're always going to get this. And
Okay,
I
because
think
that's
that,
what I was going to ask you. I mean, it's like, wait a minute, Stan fucking Lynch? Come on. He's
great
a
drummer,
shit
man.
drummer? Come
Yeah.
on. What is, and Jimmy Iovine is a friggin' legend, but what is it that you're listening to that you're not liking? I don't
Well,
get it.
I mean, my take on that is that he just didn't like him, and so the way you get back at him is to call him a shitty drummer, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that simple. That's just needling someone. That's just having a go at someone, trying to get a reaction.
Right.
And maybe if he can get enough of a reaction from Stan, maybe Tom will turn around and fire him for him, and he gets rid of the problem as he sees it, right?
That
And by the
just
same
pissed
token,
me off.
I would also say that. And I wonder if Stan's talked about this, that there's a little bit of naivety there about, put Deputy Dog behind the board, we're still going to sound like us. Yeah, but that's not really the way a record works. If you're capturing a
Yeah.
live performance, it's really difficult to capture how a band sounds. You need to have a really good engineer and really good producer to do that. You need the performances, of course, and everyone needs to be tight, which the Heartbreakers are, but you still need to capture that. And that's where they see the whole thing with Shelley Yakis, they find this wood in the corner of the room. The real top level sound engineers, they can hear those differences. They can tell that the reverberation's off. They know the room, how it sounds, and if they're not getting it, they'll change it. Which, of course, if you're Stan Lynch and you want to play drums and you want to play loud and you want to play live and play by feel, that's just the exact opposite of how you want to work, right? So, of course, that's going to be tension. So,
Yeah, he could see Tom and Jimmy off in the distance talking secretly about something, and Stan knew. They're talking about me. You want to, Jimmy's trying to tell Tom, like, get rid of this guy.
yeah.
I just blows my mind. I mean, I guess Stan was a difficult guy to work with. I don't know, but I love his drumming. And as much as I enjoy the post Stan Lynch era, Steve Ferrone is a great drummer,
Yeah.
but Stan just had his own feel. And as a drummer, you can maybe explain it better than I can. But
well,
it's
he's
like
a very musical drummer, right? He's also a musician as well. He plays guitar and he writes songs himself, and he came up with all sorts of.
It's loose but heavy and aggressive, but there's that looseness there with the cymbals, and he's almost like playing behind the beat. It's like just like his own
Super
rhythm
creative,
that
yeah.
changed. Like even Mike says later in the book, when he's not there and Steve Ferrone's there, the whole sound of the band shifts. It's more mellow, it's softer, it's a little more, which is where Tom wanted to be at that point in his life. So I get it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean, and great drummers are going to bring parts, right, as well. That's the other thing. Mike already said that with the American Girl, bringing in the Bo Diddley, the dump, the dump, ba dum, ba dum, bum, bringing that into that song
Right.
is exactly what that song needs. And so a great drummer's going to, probably pick up on it maybe after 2 or 3 different versions or something, but Stan nails it straight away, hears it. So he can hear us, he can hear the song and he can get inside the song, which he did, again, I mean, all throughout his tenure with the Heartbreakers. He always played the right thing.
let's talk Refugee. Let's see, page 261. Here we go. Let's go to Refugee now. All right. One day, as Tom and I were listening to a playback of Refugee with all my parts added, Jim Keltner appeared. Jim just appears out of nowhere.
Again.
I love the story. He played on the Traveling Wilburys albums, but he was so humble. They're like, "We'll make you a Wilbury." He's like, "No, I'm good."
Yeah.
He said, "No."
Buster Sadbury, that was his name on the album.
Right. I turned around and he was standing in the doorway. You know what this song needs? What? Jim held up a little egg-shaped shaker, a Latin percussion instrument that sounds like a maraca. He shook it to the beat. It filled out Stan's drums and sat perfectly in the mix. Jimmy added it to the track and then started adding percussion all over the record, making it even thicker and denser. Refugee got so thick it felt like there was no air in it, so I asked for an accordion. At the pre-chorus, I played long swells on the D and then the B. You could barely hear it, but suddenly it felt like the song was taking a deep breath. Another great story. Jim Keltner, just coming and going, just showing up out of nowhere.
And it's funny too, right?
Imparting his wisdom.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Keltner's another one of those. There's a reason why that guy's played on 1 million records for 1 million different people, because again, he's one of those guys who can hear a song and he just knows intuitively exactly what it needs. And Keltner's one of those guys too. He'll come in, he'll nail his part first time, every time, no hassle. He'll be pleasant to be around. He's a good hang. That's why these guys have these careers as session musicians, because they're really, really, really good. But I was going to say too, like you read that about a shaker. it's like everyone thinks, oh yeah, anyone can play shaker. Like it's just easy. All you got to do is keep time. It's like, no, baby. Those things have a very specific way those little things move around inside the egg. And if you don't get the rhythm of it exactly right and just a little bit harder or a little bit softer on each time, it's going to sound that wee bit different. So
Yeah.
again, good percussionists, they're not to be sniffed at.
All right, here's the great story on Even the Losers. Pre-internet era, I always wonder, who is that? It's just the normal noises in here. It almost sounds like a New York accent or somebody from Long Island. So in the beginning of that song, if you're a Petty fan, you know, that's what you hear. And then it goes into Even the Losers. One day, this is Mike, one day Tom and I stumbled across an exchange on my original demo for Here Comes My Girl, and we busted out laughing. I'd had the 4-track set up at home and was trying to record the guitar part, but the washing machine was running. Every time I put on my headphones to record, I thought I heard it squeaking. I called out irritated to Marcy in the other room and asked her what it was, but she didn't answer. I called out again. What is that? I'm trying to record. Marcy shot back that she didn't know what I was talking about, and she said, it's just the normal noises in here. She meant, we are not in a recording studio. We're home. What do you think you're listening to? This is what home sounds like. If you were ever here, you'd know that. That cracked us up. It seemed pretty fitting. We added that to the beginning of Even the Losers. That part of making the record was really fun. There were other fun parts too. Yeah, that's awesome.
But it's great too that Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs, obviously Mike's current band that he's
Very
touring
good.
with. Very
like
good. But
it.
Marcy comes on stage sometimes when they do Even the Losers. She'll come out and
great.
she'll say it's just the normal noises in here. And then she walks and everyone just loses their minds, of course, right? So yeah.
Well, that's one great thing about this book is it's giving exposure to the Dirty Knobs, because I hadn't listened to any of his work with the Dirty Knobs. And then this past weekend went to Spotify, so let's give it a listen. And the most popular song and the most streamed song is Motherfucker.
Fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy. Yeah, it's amazing, brilliant song. Yeah. But his External Combustion, that was the album for me where, because his first album was good, but it was sort of what you expect from a Mike Campbell album. It was very blues rocky. It was sort of, kind of down and dirty, and I would say maybe simplistic in a lot of cases, where you think, okay, well, he's not got Tom there to write lyrics and everything. But then when you get into External Combustion and you get into Vagabonds, Virgins, and Misfits, it's like, oh, he's found his own voice now.
Yes,
like he's actually writing songs that are they've got more depth, they've got more complexity, and he gets closer to, what he was doing with Tom. And of course, we'll end up talking about that passage of the book about what Tom said to him about his songwriting. Well, he's so far beyond that now. And of course, he's got, like you said, those thousands of hours of tape kicking around that he can always go back to and find, oh, that's a good riff. I can build something around that,
You know what's crazy is when you listen to that Rolling Stone interview or listen to any of his interviews, boy, he sounds like Tom Petty. They talk the same. But he also is a little bit like, it's like a combination of Tom Petty and Don Henley. Yeah. It sounds like a little bit of each. He had somebody was telling him too, he said, somebody was telling him to follow your influences until you find your own voice. And you will, out of that.
Yeah.
And that's with anything, with writing, broadcasting, whatever, painting, whatever. Whoever influences you, just take from them. You're not copying, that's your template. But then from there, out of that comes your own voice.
I can't remember it was who the quote came from, but one of my favorite quotes about that is I was listening to an interview with a musician and someone had said, like, what are your influences? And he said, everything I hear influences me, whether it's influencing me not to do that or influencing me to listen to this to get some ideas. But every single piece of music influences you. And I always like the idea that, when you listen to, I don't know, like Megadeth, or you listen to Metallica, or you listen to whatever it is, and then they're being interviewed and they say, well, what are your influences? And it's the Beatles and it's Chuck Berry, and it's like, we don't hear any of that in the music.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's a good thing. If you're taking your influences and absorbing it into your own sound, that's really the point you want to get to, right?
Sure. All right, next song is The Waiting. Tom looked for flashes of inspiration, and he could be incredibly prolific. If one song didn't work, he would just write another. But he knew this one was something special. He just didn't know what it was. He felt like he was waiting for it to reveal itself, and he hated waiting. It made him remember this thing Janis Joplin said in an interview. She said, I love being on stage. Everything else is just waiting. And then suddenly he had the title, The Waiting. And then the chorus came to him. Over the next few weeks, playing it over and over, he wrote the verses.
Yeah, and that's the one that Tom would play constantly. It just came that progression over and over and over again to the point that next door neighbors would be banging on the wall. You quit playing that damn song. We're sick of it.
All right, let's go to You Got Lucky. By the way, any songs here, Kevin, that I'm not getting to and you want to talk about? By all means. I just picked the ones. I tried to pick a lot of the hits, so people.
I don't know, man. You're doing it. This is great because you're serving them up, and I'm just getting to sit in backcourt and hit them back to you. This is fantastic.
Isn't it great being a guest? You just get to have all the fun. I was just on Corey's podcast to do the movie Fletch with him.
Yeah, I can't wait.
That was one of the funnest interviews I've ever done because I was just sitting there and he was doing all the work. I'm sitting there just laughing my ass off talking about Fletch.
Well, Corey's such a pro, right? Like it's so easy
God.
podcasting with him. So.
Yeah. Oh my God. Absolutely. That's by the way, let's give a plug to that podcast. He's got 3 of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Corey Morissette, by the way. Corey, what's up? What are Corey's 3? Hold on.
And the podcast will rock.
Well, that one I know.
And the entire Van Halen catalog. He also does the Ultimate Catalog Clash with me, where we break down an artist's catalog once per season. And then his new show, or sort of up show, The Power of Positive Geeking, which is the one you were on talking about movies and TV shows hopefully at some point.
Geeking, yeah.
And
he's got another one in the works, right? The
Rock Court.
Rock Court. So it's
he's a creative guy. It's a lot of fun.
All right, let's see. So You Got Lucky. That's the next one here. So page 295.
Ennio Morricone.
Yes, this is a great story. I remember this from long ago, but always worth retelling. Let's see. I wrote the music for You Got Lucky. And when we cut it, Tom asked me to add a guitar solo. I reluctantly agreed, but I didn't want to play some big league guitar squall. Tom said, play like Clint Eastwood. I plugged in an old Strat, cranked the reverb, and played tribute to Ennio Morricone's longtime collaborator guitarist, Bruno Battisti da Mario. Did I get that right?
I think so.
I don't know.
Well, dude, you're up near New York. You should have that accent down, right?
Everybody can whistle his guitar part in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but nobody knows his name. Yeah, that's another great story on the guitar solo. Let's see, what do we got here? The video for Don't Come Around Here No More. I thought this would be fun to read.
Alive. Yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is about when he walks into the studio and looks around. Yes. And what the fuck is going on here? The days at Tom's home studio finally wound down. Tom titled the new album Southern Accents. Don't Come Around Here No More was chosen as the single. As the label readied the album for release, we all descended on SIR Studios to shoot the video. I walked into the soundstage and a screaming pink piglet ran by, chased by a production assistant, and then another, and then another. Nobody could catch it. And everybody was afraid it would shit all over the gleaming checkerboard floors of the set or knock over the towering fake mushrooms that had been constructed. I asked somebody on the film crew why there was a pig running around. She turns into a pig. Who turns into a pig? Alice. Who's Alice? The director, Jeff Stein, explained the super fun and trippy concept to the band. It was an Alice in Wonderland thing. Stein said he had been inspired by that wonderful top hat Tom had taken to wearing. I glanced at Stan and had to look away. He was beaming with amusement. Mm-hmm. I love this part. Tom walked out dressed as the Mad Hatter, tiny under a giant purple top hat and an oversized bow tie. Dave followed him, dressed like some kind of bug, with tights tucked into his boots. That's Dave
Stewart.
Dave Stewart, yeah. And they sat him on top of one of the mushrooms with a burbling hookah and a sitar. I was more than happy to dress up like a theme park pirate, steal a cupcake, and eat a cookie shaped like a teacup.
So good, hey?
Yeah,
Can you imagine walking into that set, though, if no one's prepped you? Like, we're gonna go shoot a music video. You think, okay, well, we're probably gonna stand around and play our instruments, and suddenly you walk in and there's a pig running around. It's like, whoa, what's going on here now?
And how about the quote unquote controversial part where Alice turns into a cake and they all eat her? Somehow that was controversial, so they had to they cut that out. I think, right? That's not in the.
No, it's in the video.
Oh no, there was another part of it though. There was another part they were gonna have in there, like it was gonna be chocolate sauce coming out of it or something, and they were like, nah, it looks like something that was alluded to blood or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that when you think about it now, like in terms of, the videos that are on MTV or not MTV, but videos are online now, you're like, well, this is tame. I mean, it is. I mean, it's cartoonish and it's a nursery rhyme, and it's just. I think I get frustrated with that. You know, it obviously it's not real. They're not really eating it. Just calm down, like it's just a parody. Well, you think about it, right? We all grew up watching Roadrunner. We get what this is.
Oh,
you don't have to condescend us. You know,
the Three Stooges. I remember Mo talking about that in an interview in Cleveland. There were these nuns or somebody that complained, so they pulled the Three Stooges off the local television station. It's the Three Stooges.
Yeah, it's crazy. Slapstick. It's just slapstick.
Come on. All right, let's talk about one that's not a Tom Petty song, but it's one of the greatest songs ever, period. Boys of Summer. Don Henley. What a notch on his belt, Mike Campbell.
Well, and so this is where you start getting into the Heartbreakers starting to work with other people as well, right? Which we should say that for those people who don't know, if you go and look at the list of credits for not just Mike Campbell, Ben Montench, Stan Lynch, Howie Epstein, but also Tom Petty and everyone in that band, they've all collaborated with some of the big serious heavyweights, and you don't always know that they've co-written or they've played on different albums or whatever it might be. You know, people don't necessarily know that Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were the band on Johnny Cash's second American Recordings album, for the entire album, not just, you know, I mean, they did the whole thing with him. So they've got this sort of, and they were Dylan's backing band. You've got this set of guys who not only have they got this Hall of Fame career as a band, they're also continually working when they're not out on tour with their own material.
Here's the excerpt on The Boys of Summer. I went home and sat at the kitchen table and called the number. So somebody gave
Jimmy Iovine had said that Don
right.
Henley was looking for songs. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Don Henley answered. I introduced myself. I had seen the Eagles once and thought they were great, but I'd never met Don before. I said, Jimmy mentioned you might be looking for songs. Don said he was. His second solo album was almost done, but it needed something. Do you want a ballad or a rocker? And Henley said, I'm looking for an image maker. A what? An image maker. Something epic. You got anything like that? I thought about it for a moment. Well, I said, now that you mention it. Don wanted to hear it right away. He didn't live all that far from me. The next morning, I grabbed a cassette of the song and drove over with the windows rolled down. It was a sunny September day. The air was crisp with the first cool air of fall. I could feel the change of seasons coming. At the towering gate at the end of his driveway, I leaned out my car window and pressed the call button. I heard a crackle. I started to say hello and who I was, but the gate parted slowly as I was mid-sentence. I drove to the top of his driveway and parked near the house. Don walked all the way to the opposite head of the table, must have been 20 feet, and sat down next to a small cassette player. He popped the tape in and pressed play. He leaned over the player and stared at it. The beat started. The sharp sliding guitar notes rang out. The three-note keyboard melody rolled in like waves. The guitar fills cawed around them as cold gusts of electric drums settled into the song's driving beat. Don sat stone-faced, inscrutable, as he listened. I had changed the alleged jazzy chord, a minor seventh, to a power chord. It rang out to kick off the big anthemic chorus. Don had no reaction. When the song ended, Don reached over and pressed stop. He didn't say a word. He stared at me from the end of the table with his eyes narrowed, then said, okay, thanks for coming, Mike. And then he got up and led him to the front door. That's so Don Henley. After he said goodbye, I stood on his porch for a minute and thought, wow, that didn't go well. I drove home slowly, hoping Marcy wasn't home so I wouldn't have to talk about it. I came through the front door, sat down on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. Marcy looked over. How'd it go? I shook my head. I couldn't even muster, don't ask. The phone rang. Now what? My hand rested on the handset for a ring or two before I answered. Hello, Mike? Yeah, Don. Hey, Don, sorry if I have just written the best song of my life to your music. I sat forward. What? I have just written the best song of my life to your music. How? It sort of wrote itself, Don said. I got so inspired by that track, it just came screaming out of me. What's it called? The Boys of Summer. Bang!
And that's so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And it's that thing of, you know, because he played that for Tom, and sort of that was on one of the cassettes he'd given Tom, and Tom had said that he just didn't feel like it was the right kind of sound for them at the time. And of course, doing Southern accents, that was a bit of a tumultuous period for the band, and obviously Tom wasn't necessarily in the best headspace and definitely regretted passing on it, which is why you get Runaway Trains on Let Me Up I've Had Enough. That's where that song comes from, because it's a similar vibe.
Yep.
It's got that drum machine kind of thing, and obviously Petty's like, well, I'm not letting that one go.
I love that song.
You know, great song. Yeah, I love that track too.
But yeah, remember when he was in the car, Petty and Mike Campbell are in the car, and Boys of Summer comes up on the radio. It was on the radio all the time. You couldn't avoid it. And finally, Petty's like, I gotta hand it to you, man.
That's a good song.
That's good. You can just picture Tom Petty when he say, "Gotta hand it to you. You did a real good job on that one."
Well, and the thing about that one too is that, again, I mean, obviously people know it as a Don Henley song, but that one literally was well, he changed the key, he re-recorded it in a different key because Henley wanted to sing it in a different key, but it's literally Mike Campbell doing everything and then Don Henley singing. That's literally it. That's all that song is. It's all drum machine and then just guitars laid over top of it. And for how good it sounds, for that all to come out of one person's brain, can you imagine?
Unbelievable.
How
about Full Moon Fever having no hit potential? That's what MCA Records said at first, right? And then
we don't hear a single.
And there was a different guy that came in, I think, and took over. And because of the Traveling Wilbury success, suddenly, hey, this is going to be great.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's what changed it. The Traveling Wilbury success. MCA changed their mind about Full Moon Fever.
Yeah, because Full Moon Fever was recorded and finished before they started the Traveling Wilburys album, and then that, like I said, that comes out, and then it's okay. But I think it was Larry Wonka too over at Warner Brothers had said Tom was at some party or other, and they played, I think Jeff Lynne or George was there, and he said, "Well, you should play that." You should play that Free Falling song, and they got out the guitars and played it through, and they're talking about it, and Tom says to Larry, he says, "Yeah, I'm a record. They don't want to put it out, like they don't hear a single." And I guess he says to him, "Well, I'll fucking release it."
Yeah. And speaking of Free Falling, here's the excerpt from that. Jeff Lynne in my studio recording a song like that. It was so good. I loved the simple, soaring, melodic refrain that ran through the whole song. And when Tom sang the big "I'm Free," I knew it would be an anthem. I knew it would be one of Tom's most iconic songs. I couldn't wait to be a part of bringing it to life. But my ego was bruised nonetheless. I had been writing songs for Tom for a decade, and never once had he invited me to actually sit down and write with him, nose to nose, like he kept saying. But now he bumps into Jeff Lynne, and they are songwriting partners. I could have let my feelings get in the way and say I wasn't in the mood to record or that I was busy, but why? What else was I going to do those next few hours? I could have recorded another one of my songs or walked the dog or taken a nap. Instead, we recorded Free Fallin'. I'm so glad we did. Again, there's the part of grateful.
Yeah.
Heads on straight. He could have said, "Fuck you, I'm out of here."
Yeah.
Right? He could have pissed Tom Petty off at that point and said, "Fine."
Yeah, he is on Free Fall, and he plays acoustic guitar in it. Sure. Like, I mean, there's so much guitar on it. It's funny because you don't think of Full Moon Fever as a guitar album, but it is stacked tits to tail with guitar. You just don't hear it because it's so well mixed.
Yep.
But what I love about that too is that the story is that they were done free falling, and they left Mike just mixing it a little bit, and Tom and Jeff went off in another room and wrote "I Won't Back Down." So you got two enormous songs just going on so organically and so naturally.
Just whipped it up. I mean, Mike pokes his head in the room when they were working on it, and Tom was stuck for a line. He says, "What rhymes with back down?" I've already got stand my ground and turned around. And Mike says, maybe something about not letting the world drag you down, or don't let the world push you around. Maybe something like that. They worked a little longer on it, then came out of the room and played me "I Won't Back Down."
But that's again, I mean, that's that. It's weird, right? Because Mike's saying that, well, why are you not writing with me that way? But it's just different with some people, right?
Sure.
The way that we work best is you bring me stuff and I try and write to it, and then we'll work stuff out in the studio. Obviously, you do get that kind of stuff too. But with Jeff Lynne, it's just a different relationship, and I can sit down. And I think there is maybe some part of Tom too that didn't necessarily yet consider Mike an equal on the songwriting side, where Jeff Lynne's coming in with the pedigree from ELO, of course, and he's got a million hits himself and top 10 singles and #1 singles. So I think there's maybe just a little bit more deference to someone who he conceives or perceives as being a little bit more, on his own level.
Sure. 2 generational anthems in one day.
Yeah.
Mind blowing.
Isn't that crazy? One day they wrote those 2 songs.
Yeah, regarding most of the Heartbreakers not being on Full Moon Fever, that's interesting. Because that
wasn't good.
The guys didn't realize that Petty was even recording.
Yeah.
They found out later.
Yeah. And again, that comes down to, it's the same thing with the contract stuff and the money stuff, right? It's like, okay, that's fine to go and do your own thing. And, you can't sort of say, unless you're, Metallica and you're telling your bass player you can't go off and play in a different band. It's kind of a weird thing to say, no, you've got to be exclusive to us. But just come and tell people. I think, though, my sense of that is that Tom writing with Jeff Lynne, it was more about, it was just fun. It was a break. It was just it just all came so fast and so naturally that Tom didn't even really think about oh, I should check in with Benmont. I should check in with Howie. I should check in with
Right.
Stan. I don't think it entered his brain. I don't think it was a sort of an exclusive thing. I don't think he was actually trying to push anyone out. I think it was just, well, let's get this done with the people who are here now. We'll get Jim Keltner to come and play on a song, and we'll get this, someone else to come and play on a song, and we'll just get it all done. And really, you don't need anyone other than Jeff Lynne anyway, because he can play everything else himself.
Yeah. Well, Stan was in Florida, but Howie and Benmont were right across town.
Yep.
They were right there. Howie did come in and add background vocals to Free Fallin'.
Yeah.
Benmont
plays
eventually
on an apartment song, right?
Right. Now, he was going through a rough period, so the best he could do was what he does on Apartment Song. He was, I think, just out of rehab.
Benmont was a big, big drinker.
Drinker.
Yeah, huge drinker. Yeah. I managed to
he
kick
was
it, thankfully,
in
but he was
really bad shape. Like he was pretty much on his way out. Like he was going to check out.
Yeah, and Mike talks about a little bit about that, about Benmont being sort of in a bad place, and thankfully got through it. But what I like that he doesn't there's no judgment in when he tells that story, and he just sort of explains his perspective and what he saw his friend going through. And what I love about it too is he sort of says that, and I think we've all been in that situation until we know about addiction, until we learn about mental health or whatever, we tend to be a little bit judgmental. But he said it was years later that he realized, and after seeing how he went through, that, oh, this is an illness and that person actually probably needed my help at that time. And I was just pissed off that they couldn't record that day,
Yeah. Wasn't Benmont, for the most part, sober, but then all of a sudden started to drink?
My memory of that is that Benmont, from fairly early on, liked to drink, but it got progressively worse to the point that he needed to check into rehab and get himself clean, right? So,
yeah, started in 1988. Benmont was not in good shape. By early 1988, he was careening toward an ever-deepening bottom of alcoholism and addiction, the long, lonely slide into sickness and isolation and misery. But maybe it was Howie then. Howie was a guy I don't think really was doing much, and then all of a sudden he found heroin.
Yeah,
I believe that was because he was the last guy,
right?
you'd think, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Let's see, Mary Jane's Last Dance, which is sadly the last song Stan Lynch ever recorded on.
Yeah, and I've read, I don't think it's in Mike's book, but I've read, or maybe it is, but I think it was maybe in the Zane's biography, Tom saying that basically Stan came in and Rick Rubin was harding him as well and saying, I don't want you to play that. I don't want to hear any drum fills. I don't want this. I don't want that. So Stan said he went in, nailed it, and then left, and they never saw him again. Until obviously years later. But that was it. He said he put his sticks down after that take, left, and that was it. He was done. He was out of the Heartbreakers.
But that's still Stan, right? In the beginning.
100%. Oh, yeah.
That's him.
Pure Stan Lynch.
Yeah. Tom didn't want to cut the two tracks, Mary Jane's Last Dance and
Something in the Air
with Stan. He wanted Steve Ferrone on it, but Rick suggested that Stan play the drums because they would be alongside all the other hits that Stan's on. So credit to Rick Rubin for talking Petty into that. That was 100%. Great. Studio time was booked. Stan flew in from Florida, hadn't been in the studio with us for 2 years. He knew we were recording with Steve, but nobody had told him anything directly. That sucks. Then he got a call asking him to show up at the studio. Stan walked in, ready to play his ass off, and he did. Did the Something in the Air cover. And let's see. Oh, yeah, here's the Mary Jane's Last Dance part. There was another song, just a sketch really, verses with no chorus. It was called Indiana Girl, and the chorus was something like, hey, Indiana Girl, let's go find a world. It was pretty watery sauce, but because of the approaching deadline and the dates Stan would be in town, Tom focused on it and pulled the chorus from a song he had with no verses. He put them together, and it became Mary Jane's Last Dance.
I've talked about this with other people. I think that that's maybe one of the only songs on a greatest hits album that was recorded for a greatest hits album that actually belongs on a greatest hits album, because usually it's new tracks, you know what I mean? But that's one that if that was a song that was released as a single or was on an album, that's going on the greatest hits album because it's amazing. Yeah,
and Petty was on such a roll at that time.
Oh, unstoppable.
Hit after hit after hit. Yeah, and I love how Mike Campbell words it here. Mary Jane's Last Dance was the last song Stan Lynch ever recorded with the Heartbreakers, and it is the sound of him saying, top that.
Yeah. When I've
Yeah,
heard
it's
Stan talk about that, and he says like when after going in and being sort of feeling aggrieved, and I think probably rightly so, that he was being dragged in to play on one last song while they're recording an album without him. It's it's a little bit fraught, but he said like my I went in there with the intent of just knocking their socks off and giving them a big fuck you as I walk out the door, and he said I felt that that's exactly what I did.
yeah. I'd love to get a book from Stan. I'd like to know more about
Yeah.
him. What made him tick? What was he outspoken? Did he just tell it like it is?
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, he seemed Don Henley saw something in him that was perfect, and it was really cool because he's the one who said to Stan, "You're a songwriter in the
Yeah.
making. You just got to work harder at it." I think that was what the story is, and Stan said, "Okay," and
When he
had this great relationship with Henley over the
well
years.
he produced I think two or three of Hanley's albums, and co-wrote with him on them, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's weird with Stan leaving Petty. It was like there was no sit down with Stan saying, "Hey, look, it's not working out." It was just kind of fizzled out. And then
Yeah.
this weird, "Hey, we're doing Greatest Hits album. Why don't you come in and record?" Okay, and he already knows that they're looking
Yeah.
for another drummer. Yeah, here's the comment on Steve Ferrone and I always thought it was Ferrone, but it's Ferrone.
Ferrone, yeah.
Steve Ferrone and Wildflowers. There's an interesting comment on that, which I alluded to already about how the sound of Petty's music changed just by having him in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, Ferrone comes in from, he's played with the Average White Band, again, another big session player. He's played with like everyone under the sun, but he comes in, he's not really an out and out rock drummer. He's got little bits of jazz in there, and he's got a different feel in a very specific time. But the one thing that Mike and Tom Ball said is that this guy would give you metronomic meter. Like if you need him to
Right.
sit down and play at 140 beats per minute for 20 minutes while you work something out, he's got you back. He's got you covered. So he sits in and he's just got that feeling. Of course, you don't know how it feels. As soon as he lays into that, so the song they said, as soon as he played that song, Tom's like, "Yeah, that's the guy we need. He
That's
gets
the
it. He
one.
knows exactly what we're going for."
And I'm trying to find the excerpt, but basically he was saying that, yeah, the songs became a little more mellow, lush, a little more
Yeah.
mature, but it just had a
I'd say,
different
I'd
feel
say
to
mature
it.
is exactly the right word though, Eric. Because I mean, I know that you're a big Kiss fan, and I've got a complicated relationship with Kiss these days.
Yes.
But I think there's an issue if you're 45 years old or 43 years old, and you're still talking about wanting to rock all day and party every night and I mean, there's just something that comes off as insincere about that.
Sure.
And if it is sincere, like you need to grow up, dude. So I think that moving into that next stage of your career where you are being a little bit more introspective, maybe, or you are talking about things that are beyond that, I think that's a good thing. I said that you should mature as a person and you should mature as a songwriter, and Petty definitely did.
Sure. Here's a good story on You Wreck Me. This has to do with Mick Jagger. This is a good story. All right, let's see. A few weeks later, my mom was visiting from Jacksonville, spending time with the kids. She had been staying with us for a few days when Rick Rubin called, and asked if he could stop by. He was producing Mick Jagger's solo record, Wandering Spirit, and wanted to hear that song again. He's referring to You Wreck Me. We were sitting in the kitchen having coffee when the doorbell rang. I pretended to be busy quieting the dogs. "Mom, could you get that for me?" I slipped into the living room to watch. Mom opened the door and Rick said hello. He introduced himself barefoot with his long beard and wild hair. My mom smiled. She said she was Mike's mom, but to just go ahead and call her Helen. Rick said okay. He smiled and stepped to the side. "Helen, this is Mick." From behind Rick, Mick Jagger stepped forward, tan, wiry, impeccably dressed, and radiant. His lips pulled back into a wide smile that made his eyes squint. The diamond in his front tooth sparkled. "Hello, Ellen." Down in the studio, I loaded the instrumental track and played it loud through the monitors. Not 4 bars into it, Mick jumped up and worked the little room like it was Madison Square Garden. He did all the moves. The rooster walk with his hands on his hips. Dude, that's like Twilight Zone shit. The no finger wag, the two-handed point, the little half kick. A few moments of loud guitar transformed him from a dapper, charismatic Englishman to Mick Jagger. When the song ended, he looked over at me and smiled. "I can't write to it unless I can dance to it," as Mike, he puts it. Mick loved the song, but the next thing I knew, Tom said he wanted it for his record. I thought, what a coincidence, what interesting timing, but I was happy. I would have gotten a kick at having written a song for Mick, but that's where my songs belonged, on Tom Petty records. I couldn't wait to hear what he had done with it. Tom wrote lyrics and brought it in a few days later. We set up with a whole band to run through it. I asked Tom what it was called. It's called You Rock Me. I stared at him. It's called You Rock Me? I know. We played the song through with the whole band. It sounded great. Benmont looked over at Tom. Are you singing You Rock Me? Yeah. You rock me, baby? Yeah. Benmont looked appalled. That's just, Benmont shook his head. You can't sing You Rock Me, baby. You just can't. And Petty's like, I know. Tom came back a few days later and he said he'd fixed it. Steve kicked us off and we launched into the song. Tom stepped up to the mic and sang. Every word was the same, but when we played the chorus, instead of singing You Rock Me, baby, Tom sang You Wreck Me. Huge difference, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the art of, and what I like about that is clearly that was a placeholder for Tom, and he's like, yeah, I get it. It's a shit lyric. We'll fix it later.
Yeah.
And that's that discipline of, okay, go with what you have until you get the words you need. And yeah, just one syllable, one letter, one vowel change. Just changes the whole song. Because You Rock Me would be, I mean, I've talked about this on my podcast. It would still be a good song because that riff is just contagious.
Oh, yeah.
But it wouldn't be a great song, which it is with You Wreck Me.
Exactly. You know? Yeah, that's one song that really has stood the test of time.
Oh,
And there's songs that, I think I told you this before, but there's songs that just started to rise above the rest from that album that when I first listened to it, I liked, now I love.
Yeah.
And that would be, there's a one song about, I think it's just, he's singing about middle age. Well, Time to Move On, I always loved. But
I mean, it's top to tail, that album's just
Only a
perfect.
Broken Heart is one.
Yeah.
How did I not love that right away? To Find a Friend is another one. How did I not love that right away? Crawling Back to You. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with the 1994 me? Like, when I heard that, and I was just like, yeah.
How old are you in 1994? How old are you in 1994?
22.
Yeah, so you don't get it, right? You're not old enough to really get Wildflowers yet. It just lands differently when you're middle-aged, right?
Yeah, man. I was like, shit, that song's awesome. All right. Anyway, so let's wind down chapter 54. So we start reading about what led to Tom's death, and then Mike takes us up to the last moment, saying goodbye to his longtime friend and bandmate.
Getting into those last chapters, when you see where the book's headed and you know Mike is going to talk about it, there's that sort of sense of apprehension, right? And I had the same thing when I was reading Alan Rickman's diaries, which were released by his wife or his widow a few years ago. Fantastic if you've never read them. It gives a real insight on, again, a different type of creative person, but another sort of genius in his own way. But as you start to slow march toward when you know he died, you get the sense that, okay, these are diaries. It's going to be even more jarring when the diary entries just stop. And then you get the last word from his wife and everything. But that I had the same thing when I was reading this, where I thought, we're getting to the end here, and I don't necessarily want to read it.
I know,
you know?
I know. But boy, I wondered what was going on with Tom at that time, because I still just, it's like, it's been how many years now? It's been a while since he passed. What year was it? 2017?
2017, yeah.
I mean, that's 8 years ago, and it felt like it was 8 weeks ago.
Yep.
Yeah, as the tour progressed, so he's referring to that final tour, I caught Tom wincing in pain as he changed guitars or turned back toward his amp. I saw his left hand shaking as he held down a chord. Tom's voice sounded incredible as usual, and despite his ailments, he was as happy as I had seen him in a long time. Night after night, the audience response was so loving, so rapturous, it was impossible not to be moved by it. These were our true fans. They knew every song, they sang every word, they cheered every solo. I would look over at Tom during a show, and he would be smiling. He even seemed humbled by the response. One night in Vancouver, as Tom sang the first verses of Learning to Fly, alone strumming his black Gibson acoustic under a single spotlight, the audience's singing felt like a force. It lifted us all. I played a Rickenbacker electric mandolin, so instead of the loud slide guitar solo on the record, when the band came in, Benmont played a beautiful, delicate piano part. I was so moved, I reached out and placed my hand on the top of his piano to feel the notes he was playing. Tom led the audience through the chorus, and as they sang that they were learning to fly, Tom answered them, over my troubles, over my sadness, over my worry. It hit me right in the heart. When the song ended and the applause rained over us, Tom turned to me. Nothing can touch us up here.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
But it's that thing too of, you know, even after they're on the 40th anniversary tour, you know, or whatever stage they're at, they're still at what there's gonna be all the trouble and they could be fighting over contracts and everything else. But they're not one of those bands. As soon as they hit the stage, when they became that band, that was all that mattered to him. And you can see it anytime you watch those guys live. They are not faking it, and you can tell when a band's faking it, right? You can tell when a band's just going through the motions, or there's something going on. They don't like each other because they stay away from each other. When the Heartbreakers are on stage, you can just see the little looks they give each other. And I've talked about this on my show. One of my favorite moments is when they play Walls at the PBS, especially when Tom's wearing that black polo neck.
Right.
And there's a bit in the middle of that where they're playing Walls where Benmont takes a piano solo, and both Mike and Tom they're just looking over and they're just watching Benmont play, just for the pleasure of watching their friend. You know what I mean? Like that's a really beautiful moment and again, you get that peppered throughout this book.
I was just watching that on YouTube, that show, that performance.
It's so good, man. So good.
On, let's see, the last night they would play, that night Tom added a song. Normally they play the same set, but that night the crew had requested that they play Breakdown. That was the song that saved us. After the first record had died and sat in cutout bins unsold for nearly a year, it was Breakdown that broke through at radio stations and gave us our first hit. It was a wonderful show. We were all so proud. The show, the tour, 40 years, and here we were. Still standing, still together, still friends. We took our bow together. I left the stage to Cheers and the last notes of American Girl, the last music Tom and I would ever play together, still ringing in my ears. I glanced back. Tom was straining with his hip as he moved to the front of the stage to say hello to fans and sign autographs. Backstage, I sat and caught my breath, alone. Then I stood and went to find Tom. I wanted to tell him good show, good tour, see you soon. I wanted to tell him 100 things. I looked around. Where's Tom? One of the crew members looked over. Tom's already gone. Marcy shook me, and now that we jump to the moment they find out that Petty is passed.
Week later, yeah.
Yep. Marcy shook me until I was awake. I sat up in a daze. She pulled my arm. Get up, get up. We have to go to the hospital. We have to go right now. I could tell something terrible had happened. I prayed instantly. Please, God, not Darianne, not Kelsey, not Bree. Those are his children, right?
Yeah.
I sat up in a shot. The room was pitch black. All I heard was Marcy's voice. It's Tom. Now we get to he's bedside by Tom.
Yeah.
Ooh, man.
We should say too that because we're focusing on the music and we're focusing on the Heartbreakers, his career and everything. But the other thing that I find really beautiful throughout this book is he was with Marcy from very, very young. He married Marcy in his mid-20s, and they've been together ever since. And you can tell that relationship is just rock solid. Mm-hmm. And she is his anchor in a crazy world of being a professional musician, and just one of those people who was just completely supportive because they just have a very deep love for each other, which is really a beautiful thing to read,
cool.
Right?
We got off the elevator and we walked fast down the hall. We turned a corner and stopped like we hit a wall. Everybody was standing together outside Tom's room. They all turned and looked at me. They all fell silent. I saw Dana. I saw Adria. I locked eyes with Benmont. Now, Dana was Tom's wife.
That's his second wife. Yeah.
Right. Adria, daughter. Okay.
Yeah.
I reached out for Marcy's hand. I felt like I was falling. Tom had gone straight home from the show at the Hollywood Bowl. He woke up in terrible pain. In the days ahead, he saw a doctor. He got x-rays. Over the course of the tour, the hip injury had developed into a full break. He had been performing with a broken hip, taking painkillers to get through the shows. As the hip break worsened, he must have taken more. He just wanted to be able to play. It had only been a week since our last show. He'd had a quiet night. He was happy to be home. I'm sure he just wanted to rest, but he was in terrible pain. I'm sure he just wanted it to stop. At some point during the night, he closed his eyes and stopped breathing. He suffered an accidental overdose. We didn't get this just to set it up. He had a period of heroin addiction. So,
yeah,
after his divorce
from his first wife, yeah,
it's never smart because you could take one and it becomes two and it becomes five and it becomes you just
absolutely.
But the pain he must have been in, a broken hip.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I mean, to think that when you watch those last performances, you can see that something's not right. And I've spoken to lots of people. I've spoken to people who were at that last show, and they said they could tell that something. He wasn't moving freely. He didn't look quite. But they said he was on. Like he was still Tom Petty, right?
Right.
And I think that's just that again. It unfortunately suffered for his professionalism.
In the hospital, the doctors were keeping him on life support so everyone could say goodbye. Oh shit. We gathered together outside his room. People stood in small groups, talked softly, wept openly. And then it was time. It was quiet as I walked alone into his room. I went cold as I realized this was goodbye. Tom lay still on the bed. Machines drew his breath. Oh God, that couldn't be Tom. His eyes were closed, and the soft beeping of a machine was now his heartbeat. I sat beside him. That wasn't Tom lying there, was it? It couldn't be, but it was. In that room, in that crushing moment, it was just him and me. Our music was not there. Our band, our songs, our records, our shows, none of that was there. It was just Tom and me in the quiet, dim room. I sat with my head bowed at his bedside, with all the words we had never said to each other floating in silence between us. A terrible sense of finality fell over me, heavy and cold, and I realized it was just me there, that I was alone. It was the unmovable end. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I closed my eyes. I finally told him, I love you, brother. Oof.
Yeah, it was a tough read, man. And it's tough thinking. I'm getting my breath in my chest now just thinking about that, right? Having to, because we've talked lots about the music and we've talked a lot about the origins, but Mike and Tom were for a long period they were close friends. They were tight. They lived at Mudcrutch Farm together. They ate and slept and everything all the time, always together, on the road, all over the place. So apart from the music, it's not just you're losing a bandmate, you're losing one of your best friends. That's hard, whichever way you cut it.
And the book continues after that. It does talk about what happened afterwards, and things have worked out really well for Mike. He joined Fleetwood Mac, and he's got the Dirty Knobs. I would love to see an album recorded with Fleetwood Mac. I don't think that's going to happen, but
I don't think so. No. Yeah.
But it was an interesting tour with him and Neil Finn.
Did you see that tour?
I didn't see it. I've seen clips.
I didn't get to
and
see that one
they
either,
pulled out some cool stuff, like Oh Well, and I think maybe even Bare Trees. I mean, they were pulling out some of the cool Fleetwood Mac stuff. So, but things have turned out just fine for him, Mike. But there's got to be that sense of just every day, because it just happened so quickly. So, that was the band that I just could see being around, like the Stones playing into their 80s.
Absolutely, yeah.
So for all of those guys, it was just an instant, like, what am I going to... First off, you got to mourn the loss of this longtime friend, but then what am I going to do?
Yeah.
What's next? And he had to start playing in the little small clubs again.
Yeah.
Now he's playing theaters.
Yeah, and see, again, that's another thing that speaks to me just about Mike Campbell's character as a man, but as a human being, is he's no ego about having to go and do that, about going and playing in front of 500 people or 350 people or whatever it might be, because at his heart, he's just a musician and he loves music so much that it doesn't matter whether he's playing to 65,000 or 65 people. He's going to go out and he's going to give you his absolute A game every time he steps out on stage. And you speak to anyone who's seen the Dirty Knobs live and they say it's a hell of a show. Like, it's an absolutely fantastic show. Mike's great,
Thanks, Kevin. This was a lengthy episode. I had a feeling we'd be getting into this, and
we got to tell one last story. I got to tell one last story.
Go ahead. Sure.
So there's a million great Dylan stories.
Oh,
this has ended up now being my favorite. So I just wanted to read.
Yeah,
this is amazing. So he's talking basically about the drum machine. I guess they're in the studio with Bob, working on, I think it was Shot of Love they were on, I think maybe.
I think so.
And,
yeah.
And Dylan says, "Boys of Summer, that's a big hit." And he said, "You still got it?" And Mike says, "The drum machine, yeah. Same one, yeah. Oh yeah, why don't you bring it next time?" I said, "Okay." So then he says, the Lindrum beat started and Bob strummed along. We all fell in with him. After a minute or so, Bob started to fall a little behind the beat. Within a few more measures, he was way off. Nobody knew whether to stay on the Lindrum or to follow Bob. We sounded like 3 pairs of sneakers in a dryer. Bob raised his arm to bring the song to a close. I stopped the beat on the Lindrum. Benmont and I exchanged a look. Bob nodded. He wanted to hear it back. The engineer rewound the tape and pressed play. We all watched Bob. He listened, nodding his head softly. Then he heard his guitar go off beat. He looked at me and furrowed his brow. He cocked his head and listened closer. When we got to the part where he'd strayed badly, Bob had the engineer stop the tape. He turned to me. "That ain't right." "No," I agreed. Bob waited for me to expound. There was a tense silence. "Well, yeah, you kind of went off the beat a little there, Bob. You got to stick a little closer to it." "What do you mean?" "Well, you got to follow the drum machine a little closer." "I have to follow it?" "Yeah." "It doesn't follow me?" "No, Bob, it doesn't." Bob shook his head. "Then what good is it?"
That's so Bob Dylan.
It's so Bob Dylan, hey? Like, if you had any sort of just sum up Bob Dylan, it's that one. It's just like,
man.
What fucking use is it then if it's not following me? It's no use to me.
This is one thing that Brian Hyde asked Mike. He said, is there any plans for any kind of Heartbreakers project, like having different singers, maybe Stevie Nicks? And Mike Campbell said, just ain't right, man. It ain't right without Tom.
Yeah.
He is the Heartbreakers, and It's just wouldn't feel right. It'd be
I mean,
great for the fans, but
yeah, it's the same thing we've talked lots about with Eddie Van Halen, right? You would love to see just a one shot. Let's just do a big festival. The same thing they did with Freddie, where you
right.
get everyone in to just celebrate the life and career of this legend. That would be amazing, you know. And I've got my sort of my wish list of who I would want to play and what songs. But in terms of the Heartbreakers ever going out and playing as a band, there's no chance. They're not going to do it. I mean, they,
Yeah,
you know, like you said, you've got the Dirty Knobs plus Ben Mont backed Bob. But I think that's the only time we're ever going to see any sort of
yeah.
derivation of it because yeah, it's not the Heartbreakers without Tom. It's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. It's one unit, you know.
Fortunately, there's so much music that they made, so
Oh yeah,
we
it's
can
great.
have that, and if that music's gonna last, like Mike Campbell said as well, he goes, "I hope these songs are gonna be like." Beethoven is now. Hopefully these songs will live
Yeah,
long after me, and I think they will. He said, "Hey, we'll see. We'll find out. Maybe 100 years from now, people will still be listening to our music and talking about it, like they do with all the great classical songs." So, yeah,
agreed.
preaching to the choir here. We our opinion is yes, that will. So, all right, Kevin. Hey,
Absolutely.
plug your podcast, the Tom Petty Project.
Yeah, I'm in 3.5 years, just over 3.5 years into it now, Eric. I'm at 240 some episodes. I just hit a pretty significant milestone this past weekend. I had 100,000 downloads of the
Oh,
show, which is
nice.
crazy for a little indie podcast talking about one artist. I think it's kind of
Yeah.
cool, but it
Well, you
shows that
get
that community is out there. So
Petty fans are out there. So you break down individual songs each episode, but sometimes you have interviews.
yeah, so it's going from the start, rocking around with you from the first album all the way through to the last track on Hypnotic Eye, and then beyond. Because I thought I was just doing 16 albums, and then I found out about Mudcrutch, and then of course I thought, well, I should do the Wilburys as well. And then you get all these B-sides, and you get Playback and American Treasure, and all these extra songs that have come out over the last few years that we didn't know about. Then I've got Mike Campbell I can talk about. So it's one song an episode usually, and then I do have conversations with musicians, fans, and different people connected with Tom along the way. John Scott, the guy who Mike talks about in the book, who ran around and made sure that Breakdown got on the radio, and really was the guy who sort of made sure that Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers music was ever heard by anyone. He was on the show. Paul Zolo, who wrote Conversation with Tom Petty, was a great guest on the show. Yourself, a fantastic guest
Yeah,
when
that
you
was
came on the
fun.
show, made a chat. So yeah, come check it out. You can Tom Petty Project. Go look on all social media wherever you find your stuff. I'm not on Twitter anymore. Everywhere else, I'm there.
You just
Come talk to me.
dropped Free Girl Now, an episode on Free Girl Now.
Yep.
And the other, what was I going to say too? You're on YouTube as well, right? Sometimes you
On
have
YouTube.
videos.
Yeah. Yeah, we got videos on there. We got all kinds of things. Yeah, I just, and it's that thing. I don't really have like a big game plan strategy where I'm really sort of target specific audience. I put my stuff out, and for some reason, people seem to enjoy it. So I
Yeah.
think I'll keep doing it.
You wonder, though. I bet you Mike Campbell has heard an episode or two,
I hope so. I
of
mean, I
Guys in the
hope he'd heard them and then
Heartbreakers.
just yeah. And hope it's not one of the ones where I panned one of the songs, which I don't do very often. Though, so. Of
No, but it's an honest look at the songs.
course,
Kevin Brown, thanks, man. This was great. Thanks so much for coming on.
dude, it's always a blast hanging with you. I love talking about you. You're one of my favorite people to talk music with, and I mean that sincerely. I'm not just saying that for the podcast, right? You're a fount of knowledge, and I always learn something from you. So thanks for
Thanks,
having me on,
man.
man.